So 10 matching, 9 fill in the blank, right? And let's see here, where'd that go? True and false. 1, 2, 7, true and false. And then 4 short answers. You might be able to figure out what some of those are by looking at the bottom of the review sheet. Okay? So, David, you got your homework out. One of those words, interstate compacts. One of those vocab words. May not be. I'll tell you the definition. Interstate compacts. Oh, that would be an agreement between states. An interstate compact would be an agreement between states. Example? Kansas and Nebraska come to an agreement on the use of water out of the Arkansas River. So Nebraska promises not to take all the water before it reaches us. Otherwise, we're going to sue them. Now, where would we sue them? In the federal courts, okay? Because the federal courts settle disputes between states. Yeah? Okay. And guess what? We've done that before. Sued Nebraska and Colorado, taking all the water out of the Arkansas. Okay? If you notice, well, you haven't been around that long, but there's times when the Arkansas River is really low. Okay, but in the last few years, it's remained pretty good flow. Okay. All right. Revenue sharing. Correct. This is revenue sharing is money that the federal government sends to the states with no real strings attached. Okay. Okay, this is a word, I don't think I mentioned this in the lecture, extradition. Okay, so like if you flee, like say you commit a crime in the state of Kansas, so you rob a liquor store with a gun, all right, armed robbery with a deadly weapon, and you flee, the cops are chasing you, you flee into Oklahoma. Can the Kansas police, the state troopers, follow you in Oklahoma? Yes. Can they arrest you in Oklahoma? No. They don't have jurisdiction there. They can follow you. They got a driver's license. Just like you have a driver's license, you can drive in Oklahoma, right? So they'll contact the authorities in Oklahoma, have them arrest you. Now, the cop in Oklahoma just can't hand that person back over to the Kansas state trooper. There's a process called extradition. It's the process of returning a suspected criminal back to a state where they may have committed a crime. Okay? Generally, what's going to happen, guys, is the governor of Kansas, his office will call the governor of Oklahoma and say, you guys have this guy in possession. Okay, you have this guy. We would like to extradite them, return them back to face trial in Kansas. Just got to be a process, okay? Now, If you want to flee to Mexico or Canada, you can do that. But we have an extradition treaty with Mexico and Canada. We have extradition treaties with most countries in this world. Okay, not all. Okay, but you're probably better off in a U.S. federal prison than you are in, say, living in North Korea or Iran. Okay, you can run, you can hide, but eventually they'll catch you. Okay, now if you go to those countries, I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with the Edward Snowden. Okay, so Edward Snowden was the guy that basically was a whistleblower on the NSA, the National Security Administration, and exposed what our government was, how they were spying on us. Okay, violating our Fourth Amendment rights. He fled originally to Hong Kong, but today Edward Snowden lives in Russia. And Russia has told Edward Snowden they will not allow him to be extradited to the United States. Okay. So, if you're thinking of committing a heinous crime and fleeing the country, you'll need to do some research on where you're going to flee to. Okay. All right. Concurrent powers. Now, I know this was one of your vocab words. Okay. Powers that are shared by both state and national government. So, concurrent powers would be things like this. We have state courts. We have federal courts. We have state taxes. We have federal taxes. States build roads. The national government builds roads. Powers that both have are concurrent. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Enabling Act, and then if you go down about a little over halfway, see Act of Admission. See that? Enabling Act and Act of Admission. This is something you learned about last year in your junior year, or should have. Okay. Let's talk about Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States. They're not a state. Okay. If Puerto Rico wants to become a state, they can apply to become a state. Before Kansas was a state, Kansas was a what? Territory. Okay. And in the Constitution, they explain how you create a new state. First of all, you got to have a certain number of people living in that territory. Does anybody remember that number from last year? What do you think it is? How many people have to live in a territory for it to apply to be a state? More. No. 60,000. Okay. You need 60,000 people. Does Puerto Rico have 60,000 people? Yeah. Okay. So Puerto Rico meets that requirement. The next requirement they need is to write a constitution. Okay. That constitution, so the Enabling Act is our Congress tells the territory to write a constitution. It enables them to write a constitution. That constitution has to have a representative government. So, an Enabling Act allows a territory to write a constitution, the representative government. These are the two requirements. That's it. Now, if you look at every state, all 50 states, they all have representative governments. Ours is in Topeka. We have a state constitution that sets up a House and a Senate where we get to elect those people. The state House and state Senate. Okay? That's what Kansas did. Now, I don't know if you remember this Kansas history. Remember they were talking about Lecompton maybe being the capital, and we settled eventually on Topeka. I don't know if you remember that fight. Okay. So they settled on Topeka. We're going to have a capital. Here's our Constitution. And then Congress passes an act of admission that says you are now part of the Union. So an act of admission, if you go further down, is when the Union adopts another state. Congress passes this act of admission where the Union adopts another state into it. So there's basically two steps. So there's a lot of talk about Puerto Rico right now and the District of Columbia trying to make them states. Okay. Now the District of Columbia is different because it is our national seat of government. It's not a state. They were pretty explicit about that in the Constitution. Okay. So why are people pushing for statehood for these two places? Any idea? Get more senators. Now, if you're talking about District of Columbia, which party would most likely be electing those two senators? The Republicans or the Democrats? The Democrats. Okay. What about Puerto Rico? It could be Democrats. Now, they have Republicans and Democrats in Puerto Rico too. Okay. And guys, they have Republican mayors, they have Democratic mayors, they've had Democratic governors and Republican governors. So it's not a shoo-in for the Democrats if it's Puerto Rico. They may have an advantage there, but it's not a done deal. Okay. It's kind of like Kansas. Most of our governors have been Republicans. Right now we have a Democratic governor. Right? So it's kind of like that. All right. So the Democrats they want to hold on to power. They have power right now. They want to hold on to it. The best way for them to do that would be to make Washington, D.C. a state. That would give them 2 Democratic senators, guaranteed. Okay. So we'll see how that goes. All right. So that's just, something I didn't talk about. Again, when we talk about federalism, we're talking about the relationship between the national government and states, and these are just a couple things that we didn't go over in the notes that you'll see on the test. Okay. All right. Another thing that we need to talk about is the difference between, and this actually kind of goes back to what we studied with the Constitution. Okay. And that is civil laws. What's the first one? Criminal? Okay. Criminal laws is easy, right? Laws that forbid certain actions. Criminal laws. Laws that forbid certain actions. And provide punishment for violation. That's simple. You guys, you missed that on the test, kick yourself in the butt. Okay? It's a matching, it's easy. Okay? Criminal laws forbid certain actions, there's punishment for violating those those laws. Okay? Let's jump down to civil laws. Well, we're just talking about laws, guys. Civil laws deal with relationships between people. Okay? So, in a criminal case, if I break the law, who's going to prosecute me? The government is. Right? It could be the state government, it could be the federal government, it could be the local government that's going to prosecute me for breaking a criminal law. In a civil case, I'm suing you. You're suing me. That's a relationship, okay, between people. So civil laws, I just want to make sure I get this worded for you right, okay. Okay, civil laws deal with relationships. Okay, within that, okay, you can also have things like contracts. Okay, so if I have a contract with you, okay, and you move to another state, that contract has to be recognized by the other state. Okay. Same things like a relationship here, a marriage license. Okay. Marriage license is a relationship between two people that is like made into a contract. Okay. And so if those people move to another state, that other state has to recognize that contract, that marriage. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm a teacher. Okay. I have a teaching license in the state of Kansas. Okay. I got my teaching license through studying at Newman University. Okay. If I move to Texas and I want to teach, they have to recognize that I am a licensed teacher from the state of Kansas. Now, they may have an extra requirement or two that I need to fulfill to start teaching in Texas. Like, I might have to take the history of Texas. Like, I had to take Kansas history here to become a teacher. Okay. I may have to just take that class in Texas, and then I'd be able to teach. They'd probably allow me to start teaching and say, okay, well, you got 1 year to take this class. You know what I mean? But they have to recognize these civil laws, these civil relationships, okay, contracts and so forth, okay? So the way it's worded on the test, okay, is laws that other states must recognize, civil laws that other states must recognize, okay? But not criminal laws. They don't have to recognize our criminal laws. So let me give you an example. You guys know, any of you guys have a subwoofer in your car? Okay, Natalie is driving down the road. We're stopped at the stoplight at Central and Ridge, and she's bumping. My body is vibrating in my car because she's invading my personal space. There's an ordinance in the city of Wichita. If you can hear that music more than 50 feet from your vehicle, you can get a ticket for that. That's a criminal law at a local level, okay? If you drive to Nebraska, they don't have that. They don't give you a ticket because they know you live in Wichita, and that's against the law in Wichita. Follow me? So other states don't have to recognize our criminal laws, but they do have to recognize our civil laws. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. All right. Inherent powers. This was one of your vocab words, okay? As you are all sitting there in your desks, you are breathing. You are blinking. You don't have to think about it. You're thinking about it now. But you don't have to think about it. You just do it. It's inherent. Okay? So inherent powers are powers that all governments naturally have. Okay? Powers that all governments naturally have are inherent. Or as the way it's worded on the test, is powers that naturally belong to any sovereign government. Okay? Any ideas on this? Like an example of an inherent power that all governments have? Borders, controlling its borders. Okay? Immigration. Borders. Okay? These are inherent. Okay? So when we talk about the border in our southern border right now, okay, the state of Texas, the state of Arizona, the state of New Mexico, the state of California do not control immigration. It's a power that naturally belongs only to the federal government, to the U.S. government. Those are U.S. borders. Okay? not Texas borders, they're U.S. borders. Okay, so they can't enforce immigration laws. States can't. Okay, it's a power that naturally belongs to any sovereign government. Okay, we're going to be talking. We talked about concurrent powers already. Powers that both have, yes, the state and the national. We're going to talk about express powers. Express powers we find here in the Constitution. They're written down. They're expressed. Does that make sense? Okay, inherent powers are just there. They naturally belong to any government. Okay, following? Okay, so state powers. Okay, guys, I mentioned one of state power a minute ago, and yesterday I did too. Okay, so what are some powers that just the state has? Usually it's licensing. Okay, licensing, whether it be driver's licenses, if you want to practice medicine in the state of Kansas, you got to have a license. If you want to teach in the state of Kansas, you got to have a license. If you want to do real estate, you got to have a license. If you want to be a broker, sell stocks, you got to have a license. Okay. You want to fish, you got to have a license. You want to hunt, you got to have a license. Well, we lived in a free country. Okay. You got to have a license. Okay. So these are powers the states have. Marriage licenses. Okay. As well. All right. So those are things that belong to the states, or like licensing. Okay. Marriage laws, divorce laws, those are state laws. Speed limits. Right? Speed limits. Yeah, I was living, we talked about I can't drive 55 yesterday, okay? And I had that video in my notes. I was recording it and YouTube blocked it, even though I was showing the video from YouTube. I don't understand that. You understand that? They can show Sammy Hagar, but I can't. It's on their platform. I'm showing it. I'm putting the video on their platform. I don't get it. Okay. So I just sent that video out to everybody. I'm sorry. Didn't mean to bother you, but we had some students that missed yesterday. Okay. So, I was in Montana when they went to 80 miles an hour on their highways. They did this just for a few years. They said, this is kind of dangerous. The thing about 80 is not driving 80. 80's easy to drive. Okay? It's when you come up on somebody that's driving 55 and you're driving 80. That's when it gets dangerous. Because you're moving so fast, it's hard to tell how fast you're moving up on somebody. You know what I mean? And that's what I noticed when I was driving 85, and people are driving 55, and you're like, whoa. Okay, it's a little dangerous. Texas is building a highway between, I think, Dallas and Austin, like a turnpike that you're going to be able to drive 80 on, I think, just to like speed it up. Okay. Because a lot of people have traveled back and forth there and stuff like that. So states get to decide that. Now, even when we had 55 as a speed limit, it wasn't a national law. Remember, it was the carrot and the stick. It was, hey, if you want money, transportation, you'll change your speed limits. Okay? Same thing with the drinking age. Those are state laws. Okay? Marijuana is a federal law. See the difference? Okay? All right. State power, civil laws, elastic clause. Okay? The elastic clause is the nickname for a different clause in the Constitution. Does anybody know what that is? this was on your vocab. The necessary and proper clause. Necessary and proper clause. Making all laws necessary for carrying out its constitutional powers. That's what the Constitution says. Article 1, Section 8. Make all laws necessary and proper for carrying out constitutional powers. Now, what does that mean? Okay. Why they call it the elastic clause, guys, because it stretches the authority of the national government. It stretches its powers. It gives it more power. It's kind of a broad statement to make all laws necessary and proper. Okay, let me give you an example. Something that I think you're probably familiar with. When Obamacare was passed in 2009, they set up insurance pools where people could go on a website and buy insurance from insurance companies, but the government set up the website. Okay. And if you couldn't afford that insurance and you met the right requirements, you could go on to Medicaid instead. Okay, which is government health care. Okay. These exchanges, these insurance companies, so basically the federal government was telling the insurance companies, when you sell insurance, you have to sell what's basically a Cadillac policy. That, you know, Cadillac is a nice car. It's got everything in it. It's got power everything, right? It's got the power windows. It's got the sunroof. It's got anti-lock brakes. It's got airbags all over the place, right? It's got all the bells and whistles. So the insurance that you buy through the government, from private insurance companies, has everything in it, covers everything, including things like contraception, including things like abortion. Okay, so if you bought insurance from these companies, those things were included. Now, the Wichita Diocese helps provide insurance for all of its employees, including the sisters and the priests. That money that the diocese is spending on insurance is going to cover things like contraception and abortion, which violates people's religious freedom, which is found in what amendment? The First Amendment. So Hobby Lobby, which is owned by a Christian family, and the Little Sisters of the Poor sued the federal government, saying that you should not be able to force us to spend our money against our conscience on things we disagree with religiously. And who won? No. Hobby Lobby and Little Sisters of the Poor won. What won was the First Amendment. Okay? Now, that was actually not part of the law as it was written. When the law was written, who executes the law? Congress wrote the law. Who executes it? The executive branch. Well, the Obama administration sent that to the Secretary of Health and Human Services, which is one of the cabinets. Okay? And her name was Kathleen Sebelius, the former governor of what? Kansas. Former Democratic governor of Kansas. It was the head of HHS, Health and Human Services. They wrote the rules for how to implement this law, Obamacare. And they're the ones that put in there that you had to cover contraception and abortion. Doing all things necessary and proper to fulfill the role of the law. So they just added that in there. That's the elastic clause, okay? Forcing people to violate the religious freedom to implement this policy, okay? Which was struck down as unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court, okay? Win for the First Amendment. Win for religious freedom, okay? That's kind of a good example of the elastic clause, okay? Block grants. We talked about this in the notes, okay? Key word here with B, key letter B, okay? So remember, you got categorical grants and block grants. Block grants are broad, okay? So, get it exactly for you. Federal funds that can be used by state governments in a broadly defined area. So B block, think broad. Underline broad to help you remember it on the test. Remember, states like these because it gives them more freedom. Okay. So block grant for education could be used on special ed, could be used on free and reduced lunches, could be used on technology, could be used on textbooks. Okay. Categorical grant is going to be a lot more specific. That makes sense. Okay. So let's jump down and do categorical grant right now. Okay. Federal funds that are sent to the states for a specific purpose. Example that I used during the notes was natural disasters, airports, stuff like that. Very specific. Now we're down to express powers. It's not there. Powers that are specifically stated in the Constitution, belonging to the federal government. Powers that are specifically stated in the Constitution. I'll just read a few of these to you, okay? This is Article 1, Section 8. Congress is empowered to do the following: lay and collect taxes, borrow money, establish national and international trade, establish rules for naturalization and bankruptcy, punish counterfeiters, establish post offices and postal roads, grant patents, set up federal courts, declare war, coin money. Those are all things that are specifically granted, expressed in the Constitution. Yes? Okay. Did categorical, reserve powers. Okay. On this one, guys, think 10th Amendment. Those powers that are not expressly given to the national government, nor denied to the states, are reserved to the states or to the people. So powers that are not given to the national government nor denied to the states are reserved powers to the states or the local government. Okay. Nowhere in the Constitution does it mention firefighting. Were fires a problem back in 1787 when they wrote the Constitution? Yes. Heck yes, they were a problem. Okay. But that was something that would be left to the local government to do. So we have the Sedgwick County Fire Department. Okay. And was crime a problem in 1787? Yeah. But most communities had a sheriff. Okay, the sheriff is the county. And then if you have a big urban area, you have the city police force. Right? So that's something that is reserved for the states and local governments to do. Education should be one of those as well. Okay. Full faith and credit clause. All right. I mentioned this with civil laws, guys. I assume all of you have one of these. Okay. This is a Kansas driver's license. Okay. I can use this driver's license in any of the other 49 states. Yes? Because of the full faith and credit clause in the Constitution. One state, ready? One state must recognize another state's official documents. This goes along with civil laws, contracts, licenses. Okay? Even though my wife and I were married in one of the most corrupt capitals of the 50s, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, known for corruption, Kansas still has to recognize my license from Baton Rouge. Okay. This is the problem they ran into with gay marriage. I talked about this at the beginning of the school, the semester. Remember, Massachusetts was the first state to allow gay marriage. Okay? And people in Kansas and Alabama and all over the country were worried that that couple that gets married in Massachusetts moves to Kansas. Well, under the full faith and credit clause, guys, we have to recognize that marriage. So Congress got involved, and they passed what was called the Defense of Marriage Act, DOMA, Defense of Marriage Act. And it said that one state did not have to recognize another state's gay marriage. Now, I just taught you what the full faith and credit clause was, which has a higher power. The U.S. Constitution that says one state must recognize another state's official documents, or a law passed by Congress that says a state doesn't. Which one trumps the other? The Constitution. But that law stood for more than 10 years. As it was challenged, people said that law is unconstitutional, and they sued in the federal courts. But the U.S. Supreme Court would not take the case. They would not take, because the U.S. Supreme Court didn't feel like the American people were ready for them to rule on that case. So they waited over 10 years to rule on that case. By the time those 10 years were up, there were like 10 states that had gay marriage. And attitudes were changing on gay marriage across the country. And then the Supreme Court said, okay, there's enough people that believe in gay marriage now. We're going to take this case. The Defense of Marriage Act is unconstitutional. Everybody knew it. Even when they wrote the law, they knew they were passing law that was unconstitutional. Anybody that read the Constitution knew it was wrong. Okay. That's interesting how our system works. And I want you to go back to Brown versus Board of Education. Because in 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, they said separate is equal. You can have separate restrooms, drinking fountains, schools, segregation of the races, and it can be equal. The 14th Amendment said we have equal protection under the law. That was passed in 1866. 1896, they solidified segregation Jim Crow laws and say those are constitutional. We'd have to wait till 1954 for the Supreme Court in Brown versus Board of Education to rule that segregation is unconstitutional. It violates the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law for all citizens. That one took a long time. You know what I mean? So when we talk about that 14th Amendment, guys, we're talking about fulfilling the promise of the Declaration of Independence where it says all men are created equal. We're still doing that. Okay, and we have debates over this stuff like transgender right now, right? With the athletes, the biological male athletes participating in female sports. You know what I mean? We're still having these cases, and the Supreme Court eventually is going to decide whether we're going to go that route. I'm running out of time. Jeez. Okay, sorry. Federal mandates, guys, those are directives that the national government sends to the states. Okay? Federal courts settle disputes. They play referee. Having too much fun. Okay, remember laboratories of democracy from yesterday. Okay? States are laboratories of democracy where they can experiment with solutions to problems. The states are laboratories. Does that make sense? Right? They did that with the welfare. They tried solutions to a problem. It worked. Other people copied it. Okay? In a unitary system, that doesn't happen. It happens in a federal system. Okay? The states have some ability. Not one size fits all for the whole country. Okay? All right. Define federalism. The sharing or division of power between national, state, and local governments on the first slide of the notes. Okay? The debate over mandates, guys, that deals with, hey, the federal government's telling us we have to do something. Sometimes they send money. Okay? Sometimes they don't. Think about the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's a federal mandate. If you're going to make an improvement to the stadium out here, you got to put a ramp on it. That's a mandate. Asbestos, that's a mandate. You got to get it out. Okay? Do they give you money for that? No. Talk about the debate. And guys, remember, if you want full credit on this answer, you got to talk about both sides because the debate has two sides. Don't just talk about one side. Okay? The necessary and proper clause, the elastic clause, might look something up on that. These are short answers. They're with 2 and 3 points. Okay? 2 points and 3 pointers. Okay? Good? Yeah, read through your notes. Review sheet's good. And again, your vocab. Look at your vocab if you did the homework. See you tomorrow.